All right, get this, conspiracy theorist. The RNC has just confirmed that 168,000 duplicate ballots that were in Michigan were actually real. But the good news is they're not being counted because they were caught. Now, they all say it's an accident, of course. But again, how many accidents are really happening these days? I guess they're accidents when you finally do get caught. Speaking of just that, the Colorado Secretary of State, Jenna Griswold, she's an individual you probably have heard of quite often. She's very suspicious when it comes to her elections. Well, the news broke, thanks to the Colorado GOP, that there was a leak regarding the voting machine passwords. Ultimately, this took place, and it's real news, guys, not a conspiracy. It's real news. The GOP leaked the story. That's when the Secretary of State came forward, came clean, and admitted that it actually happened. She was actually looking not to tell the people in the state of Colorado about it. Now, interesting enough, a local news station, which rarely happens, grilled the Secretary of State on it. Take a listen.
A final question. This is not the first time that your office has made mistakes that have damaged voters' confidence in our elections. In 2022, your office sent out mailers to 30,000 non-citizens inviting them to register to vote. They, of course, are not eligible to register to vote. That same year, your office used Colorado's ballot tracking system to send messages to specific Coloradans encouraging them to vote when, in fact, they had already voted, causing confusion that had to be cleaned up by the county clerks. And now this leak of the voting system passwords. Given your office's repeated errors that have damaged confidence in our elections, which you say is paramount, will you resign?
Absolutely not, Kyle. And I just want to, you're unfairly characterizing and leaving out some crucial information.
Yeah. Blame the reporter who's actually doing a good job at what we call journalism. Now, you guys may have heard back in 2021, Mesa County, which is a very famous county in Colorado, had a very similar issue themselves. Their voting system passwords did leak, in fact. Now, the Secretary of State, her office, released a statement going after the county for that leak, specifically saying the public disclosure of the bio passwords for the voting machines on Mesa County should have been protected. And then she went on to saying that you can't really trust these people if that's what they're doing, and then tried to throw Mesa County under the bus. Interesting enough. Now, what makes this even more interesting, as many of you guys might be familiar, I tried and I would have reached out to Mesa County former clerk Tina Peters about the issue. Many of you guys know she was prosecuted for trying to expose the corruption in Colorado in regards to their election. And in the process of doing all of that, well, they sentenced her to 9 years in prison for speaking out and going after that same Secretary of State you just saw on your screen. So obviously this has been a very long, ongoing issue, and they're refusing to be honest and transparent with the American people. But the American people see through. We know these things are happening. And so many of them are speaking out through pollsters like Rasmussen Reports. There's a new poll out here that highlights exactly what we're detailing for you today. Ultimately, let's go to the first one. Are there election workers and officials who have enabled fraud in our elections? 49% said yes. 27% said no. Then there was a follow-up question. How likely is it that officials who are or have enabled election cheating will be held criminally accountable? Now, of course, it's realistic. 26% said very likely, which is very optimistic. 22% said somewhat likely. 31% said not very likely. 14% said not at all likely. And 8% said, we're not sure. Joining me to discuss this, Rasmussen Reports head pollster, Mark Mitchell. Mark, thank you for joining me. I mean, we kind of went through a lot of the election fraud related issues going on right now and election integrity issues. We're seeing these stories pop up now, obviously, because it's a very heated race heading into election day. But the American people don't think those that conduct or enable election fraud will be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. What are you learning through this latest poll?
I think election cheaters should be very aware of opinions in America, because it's really easy for them to sit in their government offices and look at each other and say, you know, we're never going to be found out. Nobody's ever going to know. Our elections are safe and secure. And Americans are not buying it. Less than 1/3 of Americans aren't concerned there's cheating in elections. And time after time, they see these things that aren't addressed. They're swept under the rug and they're gaslit that elections are safe and secure in America. And they just absolutely aren't. When you have more people in America say that election officials have enabled fraud than say they would actually vote for Kamala Harris, and it's 62% of Republicans, only 18% of Republicans say no, and even independents by a pretty strong plurality, even 38% of Democrats, and yet there's bipartisan, absolutely no effort or intention to address any of this. And it puts us in a really bad situation. It's hanging over this election like the elephant in the room. Everybody's afraid about cheating. We had numbers in the swing states, like 72% of Pennsylvania voters are at least somewhat concerned that the outcome of this election is going to be affected by cheating. And what's really cynical, like the numbers you put up, is that nobody thinks they're going to be held accountable. Nobody but Democrats, that is. 62% of Democrats think it's at least somewhat likely that if people cheat, they're going to be held accountable. But it's only 18% of Republicans who say very likely, only 23% of independents. It's really sad.
Yeah, I mean, if you've been paying attention for the last few years, you've seen a lot of these individuals aren't going to be held accountable. And I cited Tina Peters in the lead in all of this, but she's somebody who claims that she witnessed fraud and that she witnessed a crime that was being committed by the Secretary of State's office. And she wanted to come forward and come clean on all of this. And they threw her in prison for doing so. So again, it's a two-tier system that only goes after one side, and that's what's so alarming about all of this. But you asked a very important question that I wanted to get to. It's also kind of one of my favorite, but what should be the punishment for the officials who are found guilty of cheating in our elections, obviously? And 22% of them said that they should be blocked from ever being able to hold office. 9% said they should be fined. 19% said prison sentences. 43% said all three. Here's my favorite. Sadly, it's a little down. 2% said the death penalty, and 6% said not sure. So break this one down for me. 2%. I mean, I don't like treason. 2% seems a little low though.
Yeah, although I will say 18 to 39-year-olds, 4% of them want the death penalty. So that is, twice as likely as everybody else. So the youth are doing okay. Like that's, let's be real. Like, I don't know how to interpret these results other than this is our effort to do a public service and fire a shot across the bow of people who really are probably looking around right now and saying, wow, really don't want Donald Trump to win. Wow, I really don't want to face accountability, but we do not have the polling coverage that we had 4 years ago because the national polling shows that Trump's going to win. It's going to be a really bad place. Like we covered this on your show. Yeah. The level of violence potentially in America is really high. And at some point, people will be held accountable for cheating in elections. And this is what voters want. And the number here, 62% of voters, get rid of the 6% who say not sure. It's probably more like 2/3 after you correct for that, want something that has a prison sentence in it. Americans want cheaters to go to jail for how they've ruined confidence in our elections in America.
Yeah, and they should, but unfortunately, they rarely are prosecuted. And we see it time and time again. I had Mike Davis on the show yesterday. We were talking about illegal and non-U.S. citizens voting in our elections. And again, they are never prosecuted. And I think that's something that's really unfortunate and shouldn't be happening in the first place. But again, we continue to allow it to take place. I wanted to get to this last one because I think this one's also really, really important. How concerned are you that the winner of the presidential election may not be known on election night because of some states being late to counting their votes? 40% said they're very concerned. 30% said somewhat concerned. 20% said not very concerned. 8% not at all concerned. 3% not sure. I'm deeply concerned about that. And I've got to be honest with you. I'm listening to states like Michigan try to condition the American people into possibly this might taking days for them to count the votes. I live in Florida. We get it in pretty quickly. We changed our legislation here to make sure that that is the case. And all these other states intentionally, I believe, have done the complete opposite. So what are you seeing when you're asking people this exact question? Because it's very alarming.
When you work in public opinion this long, you start to see the gears of the machine. And like you said, they've been priming the public to expect a delay in election results. Yeah. And whether that's some kind of sick Marxist way to dangle it in front of people's faces, or they literally think that in some way it de-escalates things, they've also been talking about the 9 million overseas voters that they totally expect to turn out in big numbers this year. Nothing to see there, folks. But to me, the big message is the Republican numbers, because 48% of Republicans are very concerned, 30% somewhat. So we're talking about basically 8 in 10 Republicans. And that's because, listen, I understand why the mainstream media is not going to touch this stuff. They don't want advertisers pulling whatever, right? There's reasons. But Republicans, where have you been on this topic? And we also asked, when states are late in reporting their election results, does that make you more confident or less confident in the accuracy of the final results? Voters say less confident, 45% to 21%, but Republicans, it's 63% to 14%. So none of these Republicans think that when these elections get dragged out, it actually comes at increased accuracy. There's a lot of cynicism that they're cheating behind closed doors. And again, this might not be obvious for your viewers who all watched the steal back in 2020, but we're talking about people randomly picked out of middle America, going about their daily lives, not really watching the news. They know there's cheating and they know there's no accountability.
Yeah, yeah, but they tell you that you should just trust the election results, but they're the ones who are creating the doubt in our election results by doing things like that, and it's enraging. I mean, I think it was Nevada. It's now allowed to count ballots 3 days after the election if they're coming in by vote by mail, and it's just at what point do we say enough is enough and just fight to uphold our elections? Because the vote by mail thing is also deeply concerning because it's the easiest way to cheat if you're going to cheat, and so we'll have to see it all play out though, Mark, because we're just a couple of days away from the big day. And so I'll be covering it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll see, because at this point, I think that's all they have. I think the signs are in the states that Trump is doing better than the polling suggests. As we said, might be the case. And I mean, there it comes down to, they need a miraculous turnout in a very select set of swing states to put Kamala Harris over the hump.
Yeah. Yeah. We'll see if they have the guts to try it again, because I don't think they're going to. I think it's way too obvious at this point. Mark Mitchell, thank you for joining me. I want to remind our audience you have a great show that you do all the time over at YouTube. You break down these polls. So head over to the Rasmussen Reports YouTube page, give them a follow. The link is in the description of this video. Mark, thank you. We appreciate your time as always. Who doesn't love a good sale? Well, I love a great sale, and I've got one for you. It's over at mypillow.com. Mike Lindell has his classic pillow collection on sale. You could literally get a pillow for $14.88. Plus, there's so many great items on sale. So many new additions you probably didn't even realize he had. He's got sandals, slippers, the dog beds. Everything is on sale right now. So head on over to mypillow.com. But to lock down the great savings, you got to use promo code BRE. That's BRE. That's to get up to 66% off. It's the only way you will save. So again, head over right now, mypillow.com, and use promo code BRE to save.